today's lecture, we'll learn how to use the Rotopaint tool inside Nuke to remove certain objects from this shot here. So before we get started, we'll watch this shot a couple of times just to see what's moving, what areas can be used for our patches, and what are good tracking points. So Rotopaint tool is really useful when working in production, and as a compositor you're asked to sometimes remove cables, rigs, actors, extras, or do some fixes. So for example, there could be some makeup fixes that you have to do, and you have to probably use the Rotopaint tool in order to like hide wig lines, for example. And then let's say for this shot there could be that the production wants all the birds gone. Maybe they just want to keep this bird here and remove all the birds. Maybe they want to remove the guy back here, or it could be to remove this building here. So there's certain things that they can ask you to do depending on what the shot, depending on what sequence the shot is in. And for continuity basis, sometimes they have something in the shot that wasn't in the previous shot or the next shot, so you have to have that removed. So for this shot, or for this assignment, our goal is to remove two things. So the very first thing you have to remove from this shot is this bird here, the one on screen left, and the second thing you have to remove is the guy back here. So to remove these two things, we have to clean up whatever area they're covering. So for example, for this bird here, we'll probably have to do a clean patch for the top section here. We'll have to do a clean patch for the buildings, whichever buildings this bird is going in front. So maybe this section, this one here, this one here, this one here. So we'll probably have to do a clean plate or a clean patch for this section. And then we'll have to do a clean plate or clean patch for this section as well. So the blue wall on screen left back here. And then it's a bonus once you get these two done to remove this bird here and then this person back here. So to remove these two, you'll probably have to do a clean patch for this, a clean patch for this section, and then this building, probably a part of this building as well. So when removing objects, when you have different layers, meaning you have like this in the foreground, you have midground, and then you have background, everything has different movement because of the parallax. So these buildings are moving much differently than the foreground section here. So in order to have our patch stay on, we'll have to do track as well. So we could have done a 3D track or a 2D track for this shot, but for us, we'll just use the 2D track inside Nuke. So we'll go over the tracker as well, and you'll probably learn more about the 2D tracker in the 2D tracker lecture. But in this lecture, our main focus is to get all the paint work or all the clean plates ready, track them in, and if needed be if you have any confusion regarding the node, you can actually refer back to the 2D tracker assignment, in which we cover all the details, so you kind of understand it better, and then you can come back to this one and then use that knowledge to improve your 2D track, or if you don't understand something specific. So to get started, what we'll do is, so our goal is to move this guy back here, so let's take a look at that first. So we'll probably zoom in. So it looks like we'll probably have to do this giant blue wall here, since this is going from screen right to screen left. So which means we'll have to find the widest area for this wall back here. So let's say if you were to paint this out, if I pick this section, or if I pick frame 96 for example, to use this section as a patch, it wouldn't really work, because thing is, when I go back to frame 1, we have this extra section. So it's probably a good idea to pick the widest frame for that section. So we'll probably use frame 1 for this section here. So we'll extend this blue wall all the way here, so that we can use it as a patch for the entire frame range, and it covers this section as well. And then coming back to the top section here, so looking at this bird, we need to probably paint out all these buildings back here. So let's do a playback again. So it looks like it's going in front of like this section here, this red brick wall, this wall here, and I guess this section here. So we'll probably have to paint out something like this. And then for the shed here, we'll probably have to paint probably this much section. So to keep everything simple, we'll probably use frame 1 to do all our paint work. Since we have all the information that we need, you guys can use a different frame number if you want to, but for us, I would recommend just using frame 1, since we can get that job done with using just one frame, and it'll be less confusing like going back and forth with the trackers and paint tool, like which frame you were using as your reference frame. So just to re-explain, a reference frame is a frame where you do all your work and then you track that back in. For example, if I pick frame 65 as my reference frame, I'll do all my paint work on frame 65, and then in the 2D tracker node, I'll set my reference frame to 65. So the track knows that this is the frame I'm using as a reference, and it'll add the 2D movement from this point onwards. So the camera will be at 0, 0, or at frame 65, and when going backwards, it'll pick the camera movement, and then going forward, it'll pick up the camera movement based on the 2D track we did. So it's a good idea to watch your footage a couple of times before you select your reference frame. So now that we have selected our reference frame, what we'll do is we'll do a 2D track for all those sections that we need. So looking at the footage, what we can do is to improve our 2D track, we can add a grade node, and I've set the gain to 3 and gamma to 0.85 just to pump up some contrast. And then sometimes when you have defocused footage like this, you can add a sharpen node to get a bit more contrast for tracking. So we'll use these two nodes whenever needed for something when something is defocused or something doesn't have that much contrast for tracking. So you can try tracking on the actual footage itself first, and if it doesn't work, then you can add these two nodes and then try tracking. So I have the track done already, but we'll do it again together. So for example, for top, what I did was I created a tracker node, and then let me show you guys which points that I pick. So if I go back to frame 1, and if I look at the tracker, so I'm just gonna use the slider here just so you can see the tracks better. So gamma down a bit. So you can see I picked these 4 points, so because the shed is sitting right on top of this section here. So, and we don't have any birds walking through these points. So what we can do is in the tracker node, if I go here, I can press Alt Command and then click, or Alt Control click if you're using a PC. Hold the area here and then just reduce the size of the reference area, and then do another point, and then let's take a look which other points did we pick. So we picked, let me just set this back up so we can see those points better. So pick this point here and then this point here. So I'll do the same, and then same here again. So if you have any questions regarding the 2D tracking, you can always refer to the 2D tracking lecture again. So now that we have set all the points, what we'll do is we'll track them. You can track them one by one. If you want to have a closer look, like how if the track is staying consistent, we'll probably reduce the size of this search area down here. So if you see, if I select any point, I can see the zoomed in view here, which will, when tracking, I can see if the point is staying consistently at the bottom left corner or not. So what I'll do is I'll probably do it one by one. So I'll do this 1 point just to show you guys how I would track it, and then you guys can do it for all the 4 points. So we'll select the point, and you can see it's highlighted here, track 1, and then what I'll do is we have these keys up here. I'll say track forward. by pressing this key right there. And you can see it's running pretty smoothly, and the point is staying pretty consistent with that black section there. And once I'm done with this track, I can go back to track 2, and then same thing again, we'll run it forward. So you can do the same step for the other 2 points, and make sure whenever you do that step, you always go back to frame 1, because that's our reference frame. So we need to start all the tracking from frame 1 onwards. So if I go to settings, or transform, sorry, we have the reference frame set to 1 by default. So you make sure if you're doing it from frame 96, you set this to frame 96. If you're doing it from frame 60, you set this to frame 60. So once you do all the 4 points, and if I look here, what we'll do is we'll check all the points. So if these are unchecked, Nuke wouldn't use these 3 points. So to make sure that Nuke uses all the 4 points, we have to make sure they're all checked. And we have to make sure this is checked as well. So that's translate, rotation, scale. So depending on, sometimes you may just need translate and rotate, or sometimes you may need everything. In this case, since it's like a flat plane, we'll probably use all these options here. So T is translate, R is rotation, S is scale. And by checking all these 4 points for all the 4 tracking points, we're telling you to average it out based on these 4 points. So what I could have done was just uncheck these 2, and then you would only use the first 2 tracking points for rotation and scale. So make sure this is all checked up. And then to add a label, what you can do is, if I go back to my tracker that I was using before, you go to node and you can enter top, or for example I can say section A. So you can label them however you want to, and it's a good idea to name them. So if you have multiple trackers, you don't want to open them up to find out which area you were tracking in that tracker. You can just read it and then say, okay, this is the one for top, so when I do all my paint work, I know which tracker I need to grab. So now that we have tracked it, to check it if it's working properly, what I can do is in the transform tab, go to stabilize, and then if I press play, so stabilizing is removing that camera movement from this section here, and you can see if it's staying pretty consistent in that same area. So let it cache, and if I hold my cursor right there at that point, you can see it's staying pretty consistent. You can go back and add more points to get more better track. So for example, you can add maybe another point here, another point there, and it's a bit hard, maybe another point right there and another point right there, if you do want to make your track like a bit more better. Because right now I can see it's slightly, we have some jitteration, so adding those extra points may help to reduce that. So now that we are happy with the track, we can go back, set this back to none, and then we'll work on the clean plating for the first track. So just to show you guys what I did was, for this section here, I'm just going to copy the footage over. So this is what I did. So you can see I have the footage here without any color correction. I added the paint tool and removed the bird from that section. So we'll do it together once again. So what I'll do is connect the PG to the footage, and once I've connected that, we'll use the clone tool. I have to make sure my overlay is on. So overlay meaning if I press Q, you can actually see the Rotopaint point, and if I want to hide it, I can press Q again, and it'll say overlay off. Same thing for the tracker. If you want to hide your tracking points just to see the footage itself, you can toggle it with pressing Q on and off. So now what we'll do is we'll delete this point here. We'll extend the point by holding Command or Control. We'll scale it up. One thing that can help you when painting over bright areas is if I click here and then change this to orange, you can see the shapes much better. So this way I can adjust them easily, and then I know which section I'm referring to. So to paint out, what we'll do is we'll do something like this. We'll hold shift and then drag the mouse to reduce the scale. We'll set the opacity to 0.15 and then we'll start painting. So I'll adjust the angle a bit. So I'll try to find the same alignment so the lines are parallel, and then I'll paint this. And then I'll do the same here. So we'll set this to maybe 0.1 just to have it slightly more transparent. So you can see I have to line up those edges to make sure I'm painting correctly. So you can spend a bit more time on painting this, because once you have a proper paint out done, it's much easier than going back and fixing it again and again. So you can take some time, make sure all your edges are working properly and this looks nice and consistent. And once you've done the paint out, there's two options to keep the frame or paint out at every frame. So now if I go to frame 2, you can see the paint just disappears. So if I go back to frame 1, you can see the life for every paint stroke that I did is set to 1. So one option that I have is, I'm just going to copy this over. And then if I look at it, I'm just going to open this one up, Rotopaint 6, select all the points, and then set this to all frames. And what that'll do is now all these paint strokes, they will live at every frame. So if I go to frame 96 for example, and if I disable enable, you can see it's doing the same paint work, but in this case it's just referring because we don't have any stabilize added. So we'll probably go to the Rotopaint 5, and what we'll do is we'll add a frame hold. So what the frame hold node does is it'll hold all this paint information. Let's say if you set this to 1, so whatever this information coming in to this node at frame 1 is, it will hold that information for the rest of the shot. So now if I look here and do a playback, we just see frame 1. So it's making it a still instead of a sequence. And once we do that, so going back to my tree here that I built before, now that we have our clean patch done, if I look here, so disable, enable, I'll have to frame hold it, and then I did a Rotoshape for the clean areas that I need. So I did a Rotoshape right there, and then a Rotoshape right there. So I'll probably have to clean up that as well. Once I have added the Rotoshape, I used a copy and a pre-mold. So let's say if I, just to show you guys how the setup works, if I look at this patch here or plate here, the copy nodes copies the alpha, the pre-mold just cuts it out. So if I press K, I can create a copy node. So A and then B goes to my footage or whatever I need to extract something from. And then if I look here, for example, let's say I'm just going to do a really rough shape. If I were to just extract this, now that I have copied this, so A into B, so if I press A, I can see the alpha channel, and now the alpha is this Rotoshape, and we're feeding it into the B pipe, meaning our footage, which doesn't have any alpha. So it's saying copy alpha from A pipe, which is the Rotoshape, to the B pipe, which is the footage. And now that we have that alpha, in order to cut it out, we need to add a node called premult, which will use this alpha to cut this information out and just keep the information whatever's inside that alpha. So the math behind premult is it's multiplying every pixel into the pixel of the alpha. So if I look at the alpha and I copied it over, so alpha here is 0 and alpha here is 1. So anything multiplied by 0 is going to be 0. That's why we have everything black after the premult. And anything multiplied by 1 will stay there. And let's say if I had a semi-transparent alpha, for example 0.5, so if there's any color value multiplied by 0.5 will be 0.5 of that, which meaning will be transparent. So now once I've cut it out, what I can then do is go back to our tracker, copy the top tracker, add that, just click here, and then change this to match move. Remember we had those 4 tracking points? So now if I do playback, you can see it's doing the same movement as our footage, or as our section that's in the footage. So now that once we've played it back and it all looks good, we'll look at the actual patch that I did, and if I do playback, you can see now it's being tracked. So what we'll do is now we'll merge it back onto the footage. So now if I look at it and if I do playback, you can see it's tracked. The clean patch that we did, all the paint work, is now tracking on top of the actual footage. And you can see the bird is like cut out after that footage or in the background. So we probably need to go back and paint this leg out. So now that we've done the clean plate or clean patch for this section here and the 2D track, we can now do the same steps for the buildings back here and the blue building back here.